Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, Northern Night Skies, Moon, Myths, and Lunar Cycles, is brought to you by NatHab Expedition Leader Katrina Rosen. Katrina is a lifelong explorer whose journey began in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where she found her love for the outdoors and Canada's boreal forests from a young age. After traveling internationally as a Rotary Club exchange student and later cycling around the world with her husband on a 13-month adventure, she settled in Canmore, Alberta to raise their son Zion in the Canadian Rockies, where family life includes winter biking, backcountry camping, and plenty of time in wild places. Katrina brings a deep knowledge of ecosystems, wildlife, and landscape shaped by years spent in remote environments, and she is passionate about Canada's natural history and healing wilderness with others. She is certified by the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, a mountain skills graduate, and a published author, and a past board member of the Interpretive Guides Association. We are so excited that you are here with us today, Katrina. Thank you so much. The show is yours. Take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob. This is great. And thank you everyone for being here. And I really do appreciate your time. This has been really fun put together this season for me. So I'm excited to dive right into it. These are just a few photos of myself working with Natural Habitat on different trips. I have been really lucky to work with NatHab now for the last 5 years, and I started with them up in polar bear season. So that's been really wonderful. So we spend about 6 weeks every fall up there with the polar bears, and in the winter we have Northern Lights trips. So these run in January, February, and March. I'll be heading back up to Churchill in a couple of days right now, and I'll be there for a month. So I'm really looking forward to just getting underneath these wild skies again. And also have belugas season in the summertime, and been also working on a new trip that started last year, and we take a train from Vancouver and we go across Western Canada to the Canadian Rockies, where from there we kind of get onto a helicopter and we do different walks or hikes depending on people's wishes up there. And it's just, again, an absolutely remote, beautiful place to be, and it's been really cool. I've been working in Iceland as well for NatHab for the last 4 years, and I work mostly the September trips. And I put this in here because that's another opportunity where I get to spend another month under some brilliant dark skies. Iceland, because of the latitude that it's at, if you are to travel there in July or August, you'll have a lot more daylight happening, and you'd have to kind of be up right in the middle of the night if you want to see kind of any of the night sky. So but by the time September hits, we get a dark enough evening, so we have that opportunity for a lot of for northern lights, but also for the stars and the moon. So it's really quite lovely. And it is, to be able to spend our evenings beneath this kind of vast sky, catching the dancing aurora borealis. It's absolutely amazing if it's something that you haven't seen before. And when we go up to Churchill, where I'm heading right away, it's the middle of winter. It's a wild place. There's no light pollution, and the remote sites that we go for night viewing, they're perfect, and it's something to be very excited about. Yet, as an expedition leader, to be working up there on the edge of the Arctic in, both Churchill, Manitoba, or in Iceland, or in the Canadian Rockies, I just wanted to share in this webinar that there's so much more to experience than just the northern lights. And while we're out there, we can find the Milky Way, we can find some planets, we can watch the International Space Station fly by. As the evening goes on, we can follow the arc of Orion throughout the sky, and the stars are, of course, endless. So this webinar is going to kind of touch on that fascination of the night sky and some of the history, the stories, a few of the myths around some constellations as well. We'll talk about the moon and its phases and why it is so important to us. So I grew up in southern Manitoba, as Rob said, in Winnipeg. And when we actually start our Churchill trips, this is where we're starting. So if you just look at the one map of our province of Manitoba, you'll see Winnipeg kind of right at the bottom there. And in the bush that I spent a lot of time at was just on the edge of Lake Winnipeg there. And from a very young age, I loved being in the outdoors at night. And we would play hide and seek at night in the boreal forest, often with a big bonfire kind of in the middle. And so we'd play whether that was summer or winter. And it's much easier to play hide and seek in the summer, though, when you're not leaving footprints everywhere in the snow with every step. But anyways, I loved it. So when I received the role from Natural Habitat to be in northern Manitoba during Northern Light season, it was something that I really wanted to do. I already loved being up in Churchill, 4 polar bears and 4 beluga season, but I was so nervous of the cold. And if you take a peek at this map, Winnipeg is at the very bottom of the province, and Churchill is now up at the top. It's quite a bit further north. You're on the edge of Hudson's Bay there, and it experiences a deeper cold than even what I grew up with, right? As I've become older, I'm 47 now, and I suffer from Raynaud's. As I sit here, I'm actually, getting cold already. And I was unsure if I would be able to do it well enough or to take part in some really great photography and be all I needed to be for the guests. But as it turned out, this is so amazing. These trips are just one of my favorite trips that I do. So first of all, there's always an option to warm up and be inside. We change locations each evening, and this is one of them that we call the pod. And so as you can see, there's some guests inside there, and at any point, guests can be inside, and you can always be warm. These are some more of our nighttime locations, and there's some more that I didn't even show here. But the point is, you don't have to be outside for a long time. You can always be warm, right? But as the expedition leader, it works a little bit differently because I want to make sure if there is northern lights that we're actually going to see them, right? But I was so thankful to find I happily stand outside for hours. I had been so nervous of the cold, but in the end, we were dressed so well, and it's just magic being out there. I was constantly on the watch for the first hints of northern lights, but in doing so, I found the time would just slip by and hours would disappear. And by the time my very first trip of Northern Lights was done, this is a few years ago, I knew where I would first spot some of my favorite constellations in the sky, and how they would move throughout the sky until it was time to go back to town. I found I never wanted to go back to the hotel, and I'd encourage guests to stay out with me. And by the time my first season was over, I could name all of the constellations and the planets that we're seeing and many of the stories behind them. And I found that although, of course, I want to have the sky full of northern lights for guests, but I found I was personally so happy, when we had the stars and the moon. And that is what I want to share today. Because although thankfully I've actually never had a Northern Lights trip without Northern Lights, it can happen. Absolutely, it can. There's always a risk there. But there are evenings, even when we're waiting for the aurora to come out. So in the meantime, it's pretty cool to be in a place with no light pollution and just absolutely love being out there. So before there were constellations, before there were names for the stars, there was the moon. And so this is where I'm going to start, because one should give the moon some thought, especially when it comes to booking a Northern Lights trip. When we have a moon, it's the most obvious thing in the sky. And if you have paid any attention to the moon, even just a little bit, you'll have noticed that sometimes it's up at night and sometimes it's up during the day. And it's constantly going through these different phases. As my time in life has gone on since I was young, in the bush, I've spent countless months and years camping beneath the moon. And I've wanted to understand more about it, which has kind of led me to share that the moon is so much more than this bright light in our dark sky. It's a part of our passport, into understanding the planet, understanding the calendar, the ocean tide. So I hope you will also find this fascinating. This is essentially a giant rock hanging out in space. Its surface is actually really dark. And it's kind of like asphalt would be, right? Except for it does have the sun illuminating on it. So it looks kind of bright back to us. And when on Earth, if you have a big moon, of course, we become moonlit, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I'd like to share a creation story. I think for many of us, we can go through our daily lives without thinking too much about the sun or the moon. So I'm not sure, of course, who's all listening on this. I don't know exactly where you live, but I have to envision that some of you live, in more remote places, and then some of you will live in, cities. But once you're out in a remote place, or you're out on the land or out in the tundra during long winters or sunny summers, it's so much more real, right? So this here is an Inuit story that I would like to share. And there's many wonderful stories that you can find all around. And one of the books I love is How Things Came to Be. It's the Inuit Stories of Creation. So this goes. A sister and brother loved each other very much, played and laughed, stuffing their face with berries in the summer and crunching through the snow in the winter. But one time they fought, and sister grabbed the torch that lit the igloo and ran. She ran so fast that eventually floated upwards. The brother ran after her, still annoyed, but loving his sister too much to let her go. The young girl and boy drifted higher and higher until at last they were so high that down below the people and the animals in the village igloos looked like toys, dotting the cold, snowy land. I will warm the land for our people, the sister said. And her brother looked and felt a pang of longing for his family and friends and the earth he loved. I have no warmth, he said, because his sister had the torch. But I will offer light when you are resting. This is what we shall do, the sister agreed. For they both loved their people and the land, and they knew together that they must now share the sky. And so sister became the sun, brother became the moon, taking on the task of lighting the world. They still watch over closely, and you'll see their faces looking down on earth. Brother's light is cold and clear, and he gazes longingly below. Sister's light is the brightest of smiles, for she knows that the transformation helped the world to grow. Both of them cherish the power and wisdom of their light and the pleasure it brings to everybody. And here's another way the moon was created, the giant impact. We found out that much of what is now the moon used to be a part of Earth. Scientifically, the most accepted hypothesis is that a Mars-sized celestial body named Theia collided with Earth 4.5 billion years ago. The solar system was still young. This was only, shortly after Earth itself was being created. Earth was not the blue planet that we know it today. Instead, it was volcanic, hot, partially molten world. It was covered in magma oceans. It spewed out gases like hydrogen sulfide, methane, carbon dioxide, creating the first atmosphere. Theia, being the size of Mars, was half the size of Earth. And the collision blasted molten debris into space. This material was affected by gravity and slowly coalesced and cooled to solidify and form the moon. The moon is approximately 1/4 the size of Earth, and it's 400 times smaller than the sun. Yet it is still considered large, and its proximity to Earth, which is 400 times closer than the sun, means that moon's gravitational pull has a significant impact on our planet. Some scientists believe that we as a human species might never have existed without the moon. The Earth's gravitational pull on the moon keeps it in orbit to us on Earth rather than it floating off into space. And the moon's gravitational pull on us affects us in so many ways. And one of the main influences is the tidal friction Earth experiences. This friction of Earth and the pull on water decelerated Earth's rotation over time. So a day on Earth has gone from lasting around 6 hours to its current 24 hours. But slowing of the Earth's rotation didn't just change the length of day. If Earth were still spinning 4 times faster, it would experience more extreme winds and storms and unstable weather systems. You'd have rapid heating and cooling. The path of evolution would have been drastically different. Billions of organisms, including marine life and humans, evolved to align with the slower natural cycles as the Earth slowed to its current 24-hour day that we have now. So the moon is about 400 times closer to us than the sun. So even though the sun has such a ridiculously strong gravitational pull and keeps us in its orbit, the sun is so far away that this pull is uniform across the Earth. And the moon is so close to us, which increases its tidal force. The sun is still contributing, it's just weaker due to its distance away. So the moon's gravitational pull affects our entire planet, yet it's most noticeable in the oceans because water deforms and flows much easier than rock. And as the Earth rotates, on the side facing the moon leads to a bulge of higher water in the ocean, which results in a high tide. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of Earth, inertia, the centrifuge force, creates another high tide. And in between the two, the lower water levels create low tides. During a new moon or a full moon, now the sun, earth, and moon align, right? So this picture here is of the new moon. This alignment happens once a month. And then of course you have when you have a full moon, then you also have that alignment another time in the month, right? So when you have this alignment, the combined gravitational force creates a higher high tide and lower low tides. And these are called spring times. And this is a very confusing term unless you remember that spring in this regard is from the Old English word to like rise quickly. So absolutely nothing to do with the season spring. And many of you probably know about all of this already, but I grew up as a flatlander hundreds of miles from the ocean, and the ideas of tides when I was growing up was very complicating. Let's see. This is a neat time lapse here. And this was taken in Eastern Canada because I actually could not find one on Churchill. But this summer when I head up there for beluga season is now certainly a goal of mine. And I've put it out to some other expedition leaders as well, that I'd like to create a time lapse on the Churchill River estuary in Hudson's Bay because it's also huge. It has a 12 to 16 foot tide, that we keep track of in beluga season. So next winter on, perhaps the next part of this webinar, I'll have a tide of the Churchill River estuary. The rise and fall of ocean tides stirs the water, right? It brings forth all these nutrients, and the circulating nutrients support the basis of the food chain. So for example, the growth of phytoplankton that marine and coastal ecosystems need to thrive. High tides help bring fish, closer to shore. Low tides expose mussels, crabs, seaweed, barnacles. When we go way back in history, over many moons, the intertidal zone was a place where organisms were exposed to terrestrial conditions so they could eventually evolve to live their lives on land. Fish, whales, they often time their feeding with the tides, as well as shorebirds even, So Earth's tides and ocean dynamics would be much weaker without the moon. And it's a wild journey to imagine how sea creatures evolved to live on land, but without the moon, it would have been an even harder and more improbable journey. So I mentioned that they have this huge tide in Churchill, Manitoba. This is where natural habitat goes for our belugas, right? And when I head up there next week, in just a few days now, the river is actually totally frozen and the bay itself is frozen. You can walk right out onto the Arctic Ocean. But I just want to highlight quickly how important the tides are, especially for the thousands of belugas that come into the Churchill River estuary every summer. Tides are predictable. And nowadays, we can use apps or tide charts to let us know when it's a high tide or a low tide or due. That's very easy. We will get onto the water in different ways depending on the tide schedule. So it'll depend on whether we're in a zodiac or whether we're in a kayak, for example. put the volume down just a little. This is just a video from last summer that I kind of took up there. This is not the great, but it's a polar bear and a beluga. How cool is that? Whoa, I got cracking with some belugas here. Hey, are you gonna come say hi? You think we got Okay, so belugas will follow, high tide into a shallow river, especially. So the tides are really kind of important to them as well. So we've concluded that tides are important. And once humans came onto the scene, they relied on tides for thousands of years. So humans built tidal weirs to catch fish that came in with high tide, whereas collecting seaweed or mussels, was time for low tide. This picture here, this is an ancient fishing weir that is in Micronesia. And this is another one here that is actually in Taiwan. And these stunning structures are these kind of ancient tidal fish traps. And this one in particular was used for centuries, to feed a local community. And this one is pretty famous. So perhaps some of you even watching have been there. It's called the Twin Heart Weir and has become one of the most photographed destinations in Taiwan, from my understanding. I haven't been to it yet, but now I would certainly love to get there. And it's kind of become this like symbol of love. Anyways, I think it's so cool. But back to moon fun facts. And just to really break this down, okay, the moon orbits the Earth and the Earth orbits the sun. So the moon takes 27.3 days to do one full rotation around Earth. But we always see the same side of the moon from Earth. Yet the moon is also spinning, and one full spin takes 27.3 days as well. So technically, the moon's day is as long as its year. From this picture, you can see that half the moon is always lit up from the sun. But that's not how we perceive it here on Earth as it's running through its cycles. A new moon is when the moon is between Earth and sun. And from here on, it'll look like the moon is growing, which is why we call it a new moon. The moon's always half illuminated by the sun, but our position relative to it changes how much light we see. So since at a new moon, the moon is closest to the sun, it's actually rising and setting with the sun as well. You can only see it from part of the Earth which is facing the sun, so daytime, right? And we don't see much of it because the half that is lit is now kind of facing the sun. So it's a very common misconception that the moon is up at nighttime, but it's up in the daytime for the same amount of time. The moon continues its orbit around the Earth, and then we can see the slight angle, and then get into the waxing crescent. At first quarter moon, the moon is at a 90-degree angle between Earth and sun. It looks like half of the moon is illuminated to our eyes, yet it's actually only a quarter through its cycle, which is why it's called first quarter moon. So this is a picture here of full moon. So during a full moon, the Earth is now between the moon and the sun. So we're finally viewing the moon's full illumination, although technically it's still, again, only half lit by the sun. So even though the moon's rotation is 27.3 days, it takes 29 and a half days for us to perceive the moon going through all the moon phases. So from full moon to full moon, because as the moon is orbiting the Earth in about 28 days, it moves about 13 degrees in the sky each day. But the Earth is also orbiting the sun, but we're rotating 15 degrees every hour so that we can rotate 360 degrees in 24 hours. So 24 hours later, we have rotated back around to the same space, but the moon has kept on going ahead. So Earth must rotate a little bit more each day to bring the moon into view. And this is why moonrise is 49 minutes later each day. So I like to think of it like a second hand, a minute hand on an old clock. And I'm not even sure I could say old clock, but I don't have any of these in my house. But anyways, on one of these clocks, and each time the second hand goes around, the minute hand has moved. So it takes an extra second to line back up with the minute hand. So a new moon rises with the sun in the east and it sets with it in the west. First quarter moon rises around noon and it sets at midnight. The full moon rises at sunset and sets at sunrise, whereas the last quarter moon rises at midnight and sets at noon. However, while all that is very interesting, it does not answer the question of why the moon rises and sets in a different location. And if you haven't noticed this, you have to check for the moon before you go to sleep or each day for months to actually be able to notice that this is happening. But the moon's orbital plane is similar to Earth's orbital plane around the sun, but it's offset by 5.1 degrees. So with Earth's tilt of 23.4 degrees plus the moon's offset of 5.1 degrees, we get 28.5, did I have that right? 28.5 degrees, which means the moon rise or moon set can be 28.5 degrees off due east or due west. And maybe one day in a blue moon, I'll actually remember that without studying ahead of time. But from what I'm getting at here is how important the moon is. And human societies have long used the dependable lunar cycles as a natural way to track time. The word month comes from the word moon, like several early versions of this word, right? Although our current Gregorian calendar is based on the sun, the Islamic, Chinese, the Jewish calendars, they're based instead on moon phases. And many influences of the moon are still in the Gregorian calendar. So for example, Easter is celebrated on the Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. Pretty. Earth's ecosystem, it's so beautiful, relies on the length of the days and nights and on the phases of the moon. There are more and more scientific studies being done on the behavioral effects on the moon, on the life on Earth. I was just thinking yesterday, I think it'd be so cool to just do a webinar on this, right? Like, I'm sure you've gone through your life and said, say, oh, it's a full moon out there, as you're kind of judging another character outside or something like that. Anyways, but these behavioral effects, it's true, right? It affects all things like insects, birds, fish, mammals, us. And one of my favorites is how coral reefs time their spawning events with lunar cycles. Eggs and sperm meet in open water, typically at slack tide, and rely on external fertilization. By synchronizing with the moon, coral colonies release gametes simultaneously to have a higher chance of survival. Shearwaters are an example of birds that seem to be more energetic in a full moon. And many birds likely use the moon as part of their toolkit for nocturnal migrations. Some sea turtles time their entrance to the oceans with high tide. Belugas, or narwhals, they rely on these tidal currents, brought on by the moon to find squid, fish. And we'll time our opportunity, like I mentioned, kind of getting out with the belugas. See if we can. Oh. Lost some sound there. There we go. It's just so fun. They're so curious. They come right up to the boats and just play around. So beautiful. I got sidetracked as I was making this webinar, going through with all the beluga videos. So I thought it'd be fun to show some. But in the past, before light pollution, right, when civilizations and people stared up into the night sky, they began to understand these seasonal patterns of the moon, but also of the planets and the constellations and individual stars. So stargazing is not new, but we now have this newer term of astrotourism, which is this idea of travel focused on experiencing the night sky, especially in these places with very dark skies and minimal light pollution. At its core, it's about slowing down and kind of looking up and reconnecting with the cosmos. This is a picture of my mom and I was so happy to be able to bring her up to Churchill last year for her first time up in Churchill, and it was really kind of neat, and love spending time with my mom. She still lives out in Manitoba with my dad, and they were just recently here for the holidays visiting us. My as kind of Rob mentioned, I live in the Canadian Rockies now, and I received this like really kind of neat talking point set of cards for the holidays. So I thought I would share this because it's pretty fun, and there's like a whole section of different kind of questions you could ask your friends or family, or I think I might actually bring it up to Churchill and use it with my guests. I find it so interesting. Anyways, there's some are really neat, like, and one question is that I remember that I loved from our first session was like, if you had more time in life, what would you do with it? And I think that's so neat to think about, right? And my husband said he wanted to play more hockey, and that actually really shocked me. And I was like, dude, you're nearly 50 years old. If you want to play more hockey, you should play more hockey. And actually, funny enough, he's out playing hockey right now. Um, and then another one was, if you could have any view outside your bedroom window, what would it be? And around the table that day, without thinking about it too much, most people answered the beach and palm trees, right? Which was kind of funny because we're here in the middle of the mountains. But then my mom answered the night sky, and without hesitation, that was her wish, to have the night sky outside her bedroom window. And I thought, how neat was that, and I know I get my love of being outside at night from my parents. So this here is a picture of my mom, and she spent a number of nights outside with me in the past few years as I've worked with my cameras and learned astrophotography. And I just absolutely love this picture. She's just like plopped down in the snow, and it doesn't even have a toque on, right? I remember this night being out there. It was pretty fun. But my mom's favorite asterism is the Big Dipper. So I thought I would kind of get into that and share a story about the Big Dipper. This is a circumpolar asterism, which means it doesn't dip below the horizon. It's constantly in the northern sky. So whether it's spring, summer, fall, or winter, many of us are quite familiar with this grouping of stars. So, oh, okay. All right, it's a map. So this is a bit of a roundabout story, so stay with me on this one. But if any of you have hung out with any kind of guides or expedition leaders in the past, you'll probably know that most of us have kind of absolute love for maps. And I think this one's really cool because you're able to kind of look down at the top of the world, from the top, rather than just across, which a typical map would have. So I'll give you a little moment here to locate Churchill. And if you can find the green part of the land there, and then Hudson's Bay. If you take the D in Hudson's Bay, if it's large enough on your screen, or just some of the words, you kind of head upwards and hit the land there. You'll see a little jut in the land. That's Churchill, right? So Churchill's at 58 degrees latitude. Technically, Churchill is not the Arctic, although, stepping off the plane some days, if your jacket's not zipped up and you haven't pulled your toque out fast enough, and you didn't know better, we'd have a hard time convincing you that this is not the Arctic when we get up there. In current times, one can define the Arctic in several different ways. So whether it's climate, geography, ecology, or culture, the Arctic Circle lies at a latitude of 68 degrees 33 minutes. And this latitude is significant because it's where the Earth experiences 24 hours of daylight on summer solstice, or 24 hours of night on winter solstice. And that also creates a huge temperature swing, right? So that temperature difference, in the daylight hours, right, that could, really dictate the glacier cover, right? And the sun, if it's, if everything he's harder, then that'll dictate the recession. You'll have heavy impacts on plant growth. And these harsh conditions have constrained ecosystem development. And at 66 degrees latitude, the entire Arctic Circle lies beyond the tree line. Yet humans have remarkably adapted to this area. And people have lived and thrived in the Arctic and subarctic environments for millennia. This picture here is of the Inukshuk. This is in the town of Churchill, just on the edge of Hudson's Bay. So in the subarctic there. But I did a webinar in December, and if you're interested on the human history of the Canadian North, the Arctic is home to 4 million people. So including the Sami, Chukchi, Ninit, Halalit, Aleut, Inuit, and there's millions more if we include the subarctic people, so including those of Churchill, Manitoba, those of Iceland. And cultures all over the world and throughout time have made pictures with those same stars. Others like planets were first thought to be, wandering stars because they didn't follow the same rhythm. But whether, in the past, it was a shepherd, warrior, fisherman, a slave, or a priest, or an elder observing the sun, the moon, the stars, they notice that they follow these certain paths throughout the sky. The seasonal cadence of constellations was important to all life tied on land. And the stars have different alignments during our lap around the sun. It could be a time for revival or preparation, agriculture, fertility. The constellations have had ceremonial or religious significance. This was a way to mark seasonal changes with plant cycles. There was like animal migration. I mean, this is really important to pay attention to, right? And this would help. Temperature changes, of course. And the stories of these, became tools to pass down. So of knowledge of this timing. So it could be about like feeding oneself. It could be, with their survival. It may be in this month for religious ceremonies, or just, hunkering down. And the myths and the stars, time to the natural rhythms, of Mother Earth. So our sky is woven with ancient mythology, and even the name Arctic is deeply connected to the pinprick sublights above us, the constellations. All right, so here is the Big Dipper once again, but instead of just looking at the asterism, now we're looking at the entire constellation. And yeah, this is one of the most well-known circumpolar constellations that commands our attention, Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And the 7 main stars of the Big Dipper or Plough. Oh, that's funny. It's missing one of the stars here. Anyways, Great Bank's Tail. This is one of the oldest widespread patterns in the sky with a story of it related to a bear. So the roots that there's a bear in the sky goes back millennia, and it's really interesting I probably dove into this, actually, just this topic alone, for a number of weeks, and there's still much more that I want to kind of figure out. And this was interesting. This man standing on the rock. This is a rock with conical hollows. It was discovered in 2013 in Bulgaria, and it's thought to be a couple thousand years old. And some are thinking that perhaps it's the oldest star map, right? At the bottom here is the Nebra sky disk, and this is a 3,600-year-old bronze artifact from Germany. It's this bronze disc, and it's thought also to be one of the world's oldest depiction of the cosmos. And I put a picture of the French cave bear art there because I think that's so cool to have something, that's perhaps 30,000 years old and kind of depicted of a bear, because I absolutely love bears, And although many of the names that we now use in the sky and the stars is formalized from Greek culture, for thousands of years prior, so all across the Arctic, so from Siberia, North America, right? People found a bear in the stars. And whether that traveled as people moved, right, or whether they kind of found that on their own, and then the stories were passed down, it's just wild to think about that throughout such a huge location, people found a bear in the stars, right? There's petroglyphs in Lake Baikal in the Altai Mountains. And some scholars believe that the petrographs there are of bears as well. And there's many different stories in regards to this bear as well. And it's quite often this connection between the human world and the spirit world, the earth and the sky, kind of placing this bear amongst the stars. So whether you're Sami, in Siberia, or Arctic Indigenous peoples here in, what we now call North America, this bear, it was often being hunted by humans and spirits. The word bear, especially as it relates to Ursa Major, carries a remarkably deep linguistic and cultural history. Its roots lie in the ancient Proto-Indo-European word spoken more than 5,000 years ago. The word survived, branching into different places of the world and adapted, but keeping very similar roots. And because this constellation never sits in the northern latitudes, it became this fixed celestial marker. So linking not just to the sky, but to the direction, and place, right, of where you are in the world. And the Greeks applied a word to the constellation, which later turned into the word Arctos, meaning of the bear, which later gave to the word Arctic, the land beneath the bear, or subarctic, below the bear, Antarctica, opposite of the bear. The Latin word for bear is Ursus or Ursa. Ursa is the female bear, hence Ursa Major kind of came to be. And this name, Ursa Major, began to be used as formal constellation name during the Roman adoption of Greek astronomy, which was roughly, between the 1st century BC and the 2nd century CE. So I'll tell you a Greek mythology story. This is, again, Ursa Major here, and it's most commonly linked to the story of Callisto. She was a nymph, a female nature spirit, and she followed Artemis. And Artemis was one of the most important goddesses of the wild animals and the moon. And Artemis was Zeus's daughter, and Callisto. And even though Callisto had sworn a life of chastity, Zeus disguised himself, and she later bore his son, Arcus. When Callisto's pregnancy was discovered, she was cast out. And in many versions of the myth, Hera, who was Zeus's jealous wife, transformed Callisto into a bear as punishment. And years later, Arcus, which remember is Callisto's son, nearly killed his own mother while out hunting because he wasn't aware of her identity now, like of being a bear. And to prevent this tragedy, Zeus lifted Callisto into the sky, placing her among the stars as the great bear, where she would be immortal and protected. And Arcus as well as the little bear, the little dipper. In Roman mythology, the story remains largely the same, but Callisto becomes a follower of Diana, and Zeus is known as Jupiter, while Hera becomes Juno. And Juno, or Hera, still angry, forbade Callisto from bathing in the ocean. And this kind of symbolically condemned her to circle the sky forever, which is why Ursa Major never dips below the horizon. And this is something I perhaps feel a little bit more interested and as a part of the Greek mythology, probably because I need to go to Greece. Actually, I think that'd be such an interesting part of the world to go to. But here, this is a story, kind of more of the lands that I grew up on, and this is I want to share a Cree story on Ursa Major, and this here involves Corona Borealis. So to find this, you take the handle of the Big Dipper there, and kind of follow the arc of it to Arcturus, which is actually pretty good star when you're outside looking for it. And that's part of Booty. So then you would kind of go up the side of that, and then you fall into the cup, right? So in this story, Corona Borealis stars turn into the 7 birds. And this is in a book called the Night Sky Star Stories that I'll read. And I'll have a picture of this coming up later, so if anybody else is interested in it as well. Kayas, long ago. One bear in particular, Mr. Muska, the great bear, was the largest and strongest bear, and all the beings of this land wanted to be his friend. People gave him all kinds of gifts to the point where the bear expected them. The bear found that by using great force, he could have it all, and he continued to take and take. And the beings of the land shook in fear. Years went by, and people began to see that they could not live in this manner anymore. The best trackers were chosen. The chase was on. It was the end of the summer, and the bear ran around the world 4 times. As the trackers chased the bear around the world for the 4th time, this was now the end of September, and they moved so quickly up over the horizon that they all flew into the sky. Pipichu, the robin, took his shot. Mr. Muska hung in the sky as he bled. Drips of blood landed on all the broadleaf plants. And this is why elders say the leaves and grass change color in the fall. A drop of blood also fell on Pipichu, the robin. It landed on his chest, creating a red breast. To continue to honor the robin and his bravery, Creator then gave Robin an egg the color of the sky, with speckles on its shells to remind us of the stars. The mythology of Mr. Muska, the great bear, reminds us that respect should be earned rather than simply given or expected. It talks about the abuse of power and influence. It says to be mindful of our positions in life. And I always find it so interesting to kind of dive into these stories because there's always so much more, in them and kind of in behind them and everything. And this one in particular, it shows that even the smallest of beings can bring down the largest and most powerful ones. So this here is just again another picture of Ursa Major, and all the individual stars are named, right? And it's so fun to learn these stars when you're kind of out there and starting to learn the names. And I love the names of the stars of Ursa Major because they often have to do with a bear itself, right? And they just kind of continue to tell this ancient story of the bear, and this bear was honored, and some stories he's honored, right? So others he's pursued, but whichever, he's remembered in this night sky, and it's yeah, pretty cool. I will jump in here. So this is using the Ursa Major here again. But by just using the asteroid of the Big Dipper and the stars of the edge of the ladle, we can find the North Star. So if you follow the line between America and Doom, and I hope I'm saying that correctly because I'm often self-taught in reading. Sometimes I don't know how to pronounce these words, but that's what I've always called it. Anyways, if you go between America and Doom and you keep going up and you follow the next bright star, you'll find Polaris, the North Star, and the edge of the handle is the Little Dipper, or the tail of Ursa Minor there.
The North Star won't be the North Star for long. Polaris got its name because it points toward the North Pole, or more specifically, the Earth's rotational axis pretty much points to it, which means that while all the other stars seem to move around as the Earth spins, Polaris always stays in the same place, to the north. For that reason, it's long been an important star to help both ancient mariners and lost hikers get their bearings. But as the gravity of both the sun and the moon pull on the Earth's equatorial bulge, the Earth's rotational axis is changing. In fact, in about 2,000 years, the axis will be pointing to a completely different star called Gamma Cephei. That will make Gamma Cephei the new North Star, and Polaris will join Pluto as a cosmic has-been.
So this is I just went back to this slide again. So Polaris is 430 light years away. So just for a fun kind of comparison, our sun is our closest star at 93 million miles away, or 8 light minutes. So Earth's axis wobbles like a spinning top, causing the North Star to change over thousands of years. And I played that video because I think we all learn in such different ways, right? So it's kind of neat to see that as well. And so she mentioned that Gamma Cephei will be our next North Star, right? So, in perhaps 3,000 years. And then after that, Vega will be our North Star in 12,000 years. And then it'll actually go back again to Polaris in 26,000 years. So that's pretty cool. But what is the most important constellation in the sky? Orion's belt, because it holds up his pants. Anyways, I just have to laugh myself. Anyways, my son is 12. He used to love jokes like this one, so I'm gonna add that in. Now he thinks I'm lame. And anyways, this webinar is too short to go into all the stories of Orion. And so I'm just going to tell you about a couple of pretty fun stars. And as I was going through my pictures and making this presentation, I must be so attracted to this grouping of stars because I have 3 times the amount of pictures of Orion than I have of any other asterisms. So if you take a look here at Orion, and you'll find the star called Betelgeuse there. This is a really cool star. Like it's red, it's fun to find, it's very obvious in the night sky. And Betelgeuse is actually 700 light years away. So it takes its light, 700 years to reach us. If we were traveling in the Voyager 1, which is currently the farthest human-made object traveling through interstellar space, it can travel at speeds at 10.5 miles per second. So 38,000 miles per hour. It would take us about 8 million years to get there. Betelgeuse is a giant, is 900 times bigger than the sun's diameter, and it could hold over 1 billion suns. If it were placed in our solar system, it would actually extend past Jupiter's orbit. It's currently ending its life of a star. And in 2019, it sneezed. So you could actually look up the Betelgeuse sneeze on the internet if this interests you. It dimmed dramatically, and it led some astronomers to believe it had ejected a large amount of gas and light. It is thought that Betelgeuse's core will exhaust its carbon fuel in less than 300 years, which will lead to a supernova explosion. But while this sneeze was happening, some were saying that they thought it could happen really soon, like in my son's, lifetime, right? Others still think it could be 100,000 years away, which is technically still very minimal in star life. But when it does happen, it is thought that from Earth, it will shine as bright as the moon and it will last over 1,000 days, lighting up our night sky even that much more brilliantly. So this one here is also really cool to find. So if you take Orion's belt and you just go straight down, you're going to find this really bright star called Sirius. And Sirius is and has been a really important star for a long time. It's the brightest star we'll see. And Egyptians would time the heliacal rising of this star, with the annual flooding of the Nile River. This was kind of seen as a symbol of rebirth, renewal of the land. Now, I know I'm talking to some well-traveled people here, and perhaps you've, been on the Nile, and maybe you've even gone even further kind of west in Africa to Mali, and this is where people live called the Dogon. And the Dogo's astronomical lore goes back thousands of years. And every 60 years, Sirius, which is, our brightest star in the sky that we see anyways, appears between 2 mountain peaks, which marks its cycle in its orbit. And young men of this tribe segregate themselves, and they do this sometimes for months. They'll speak in a secret language as well. And in their teaching, Sirius is told to have a companion star, which is small and extremely heavy. They call it Potolo, which is seed star. And this star is invisible to the naked eye. So we can't actually find this star. To the Dogon, the universe is not random. Everything's like stars, seasons, rain, birth, speech, farming, it all follows these patterns and cycles. And these rhythms keep life functioning properly. When something is out of balance, like droughts or conflict, illnesses, it means this cosmic order has been interrupted. So looking up at Sirius and the Dogons herself will bring you all sorts of fascinating information, and much of it which has been romanticized or modernized. there's been lots of books written about it, and some writers claim that the Dogons must have received their knowledge from, other kind of beings, perhaps the Nomos, who are this ancient water being that gave them this knowledge. And because some say they had these knowledge well before European astronomy first predicted mathematically about Sirius B, so this other star. They didn't find this out mathematically until 1844, and they determined this by the irregular motion in Sirius A. So it must have had a pull in it. But anyways, it was not seen until with a telescope until after that. Anyways, really need to kind of dive into. I'll let you come to your own thoughts on that all. And just kind of diving into here a few more stars that we'll see. So on this, you can see the Big Dipper. It's a different form right now, Ursa Major there. And from there, if the one circle, it'll go down, and then you can see the Little Dipper and Cepheus. These are some of the apps I use. No need to take a picture of this or learn it. There's so many star apps out there. Most of them are free as well. I used to carry a flat book around, which is this picture I have in the top here. It looks like this. And I've carried these around for years. So I love to spend a lot of time in my canoe for weeks on end. We have no service at all. And so this was a really great way to kind of learn the constellations. And nowadays with the apps, you don't need any service at all. It works on satellite. And you can kind of practice these apps just at home, because it'll kind of still bring up the stars and see what you like. And anyways, I like, it's kind of fun to play around with, but there's this one formation here called Cepheus, and this is kind of one of the next stories that I'm going to find. I'm going to tell you, and then this is again. I'm going to let Wilfred Buck tell you it himself, and from his book and kind of his night sky stories.
So this story I'm going to relate to concerns a group of stars in the sky that the Roman Greek mythology called Cepheus. Cepheus the king. And Cepheus the king is represented by 5 stars. And those 5 stars, they sort of look like a house, outline of a house. There's a triangle on top and a rectangle on the bottom. So it forms like a silhouette of a house in the sky. So these 5 stars, the Cree people call Mackinac the turtle. And prior to the coming of the Europeans, Mackinac the turtle was basically our living calendar. Because when we saw that turtle, we were reminded of one complete cycle. We were told that if you look at a turtle shell, and this is evidence of the snapping turtle and the painted turtle, the turtles I'm familiar with. I haven't been looking at the tortoises or any other kind of sea turtles or whatever, but these are the ones that I'm familiar with. So if you look at the shell of a snapping turtle or a painted turtle, on the inside of the turtle shell, there are 13 main sections. And we're told these 13 main sections are to 13 full moons of one complete cycle. And these full moons are separated by 28 days. So again, if you look at that turtle shell, on the outer edge of that turtle shell, there are 28 sections to separate the one full moon from the next. So when you looked at that calendar, you were immediately reminded of this turtle, and vice versa. The turtle reminded you of that calendar and of that cycle. Each one of these full moons coincided with something happened in the environment, depending on wherever you were. For the Cree people, that very first moon in the wintertime, when it was high winter, was called Kitchipiism. And again, of course, that was around January various times in January. And then the following moon after that was Miccosukpiism. Miccosukpiism is the eagle moon, and that's when the eagles returned from down south. And the following moon after that was Niskapiism. And Niskapiism was the goose moon. That's when the geese came back. So you got January, February, March, and then April, that was Arigispism. Arigispism is the frog moon. That's when the frogs started coming out of they're sleeping and started making all kinds of racket. So this again, these moons coincided with something happened in the environment in the local area. At various places and various environments, of course, those names would change depending on what was happening, where the people were. But this is one of the reasons why this place, they refer to it as Turtle Island, because a lot of the cultures on North America, Central America, and South America looked at that turtle, and they went by that full moon calendar, that lunar cycle. It was very sacred, and grandmothers were very sacred beings for our people. And that's why we call Grandmother Moon, Nuokum, because very sacred, very honored. So that's Maganakpa turtle, Exia. That's what that.
So that's Wilford Buck, and you can find his night sky stories if you'd like to hear more of them online. There's quite a few on YouTube, and then this is a fantastic book that you could read as well. And how are we doing for time, and Rob?
We are just about up to the end of it, so I think maybe we can grab a few questions before we get out of here, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, excellent. So if you do have any other questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. So what time of year is the best for us to go see the Northern Lights?
Oh, I love that question. Northern Light season. That's the best time of year. Up in Churchill, we're right underneath the auroral oval, right? So it's we have this high probable opportunity of seeing the Northern Lights. Of course, it's absolutely not guaranteed, but there are 300 nights a year of aurora borealis there. And so aurora season it's actually pretty lengthy. It's January, February, and March. We can potentially see Northern Lights in polar bear season. It's just a lot less likely because the bay at that time is not quite yet frozen, and that's why the polar bears are still on land. And because the bay is not frozen, is kind of creating a lot of its own moisture and humidity. We have a lot of clouds that time of year, so we just don't get the same amount of clear skies.
Thank you for that. So obviously viewing the Northern Lights is an evening activity. What do we do during the day on the trip?
Up on these trips, a lot. Churchill is just absolutely incredible community. It's not large. There's 850 people or so that live there, but we have our natural habitat over time. They've been there since '89. So over the years have developed some really wonderful relationships with people. So kind of have the opportunity to meet, get to know some locals. We'll head out snowshoeing for those that want to kind of roll around the snow if you want to do that. If not, there's always a warm place to kind of hang out as well. And we'll get to go out dog sledding. I always love to take a little walk out onto kind of the river and out onto the ice. We'll talk a lot about kind of significant creatures, but also just kind of learning about the area and what it's like kind of living in that place.
Gotcha, thanks. And so how hard is it to get to Churchill? And it's probably not the easiest thing if I needed to find flights or anything like that. How do I go about approaching that?
Well, it's very easy because you just have to get yourself to Winnipeg, and we take it from there. So from Winnipeg, we'll actually fly up to Churchill, and we're on a private charter to do that. There are no roads that go to Churchill. It is, so we take a plane there. So it's not difficult in that sense. If you want to come with natural habitat, then we actually start and end our trips in Winnipeg, which is a really great city to explore as well.
Good to know, thanks. And I know our air department can help you even get to Winnipeg. So that probably is a good thing too. So we're kind of running up against time here. So let me ask you this. I know you guide up in Churchill. Are there other places in the world that have viewing of the Northern Lights that are as good as Churchill, or really should I come to Churchill to see them?
If you haven't been to Churchill, I'm not sure who's asking this question, but if they haven't been to Churchill, I'd say Churchill is certainly one of the best places in the world to go to, and there's so much more to experience than Northern Lights, and that's kind of what this webinar was, more focused on. is that, but of course, anywhere, if you take a look at the map and the Aurora Oval and find it. But Iceland, for example, is also another place you could potentially see northern lights, but the ocean around Iceland doesn't freeze. So you have a lot more cloudy skies in Iceland, even throughout winter time. So that's kind of one of the reasons why Churchill becomes one of the best places in the world, is because you're up at this location that is, easy to get to. You have a community around it, and then we have this high potential for night skies. But yeah, just go north. Really is really fantastic.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Katrina. Unfortunately, that will be all the time that we do have for questions. So I'm going to throw it back to you for any closing comments you may have for us.
Oh, okay, excellent. I just, whether you're in Churchill or, the Canadian Rockies, or, kind of head up north in, Alaska, or, Scandinavia, but what these locations offer is like exceptionally dark skies, right? We can see up towards of like 3,000 stars, and you compare that to urban life where you can only see like 100 stars, right? And when we look up in the sky in this way, we can kind of ask ourselves, have we really changed that much over 10,000s of years? When we're looking at this thing, like this bear still turns above us, and we're part of something kind of older and larger than ourselves. And wherever we are in this world, we're looking at the same moon. And over all the millions of years, you can see how the moon has had this profound impact on Earth's evolution as well as our own. And remarkably, it's up to us now to kind of protect the species that depend on the moon. And this is, so wild. And, but companies like this, like Natural Habitat Adventures and World Wildlife Fund, they're committed to conservation, right? And protecting these ecosystems. So whether it's artificial light pollution that's throwing off natural rhythms, or navigation for some of these species, there's even coral in some areas that are really struggling to time their gamete release. And, the human impacts on rising ocean levels, they lead to big impact on the tides. But, so if we can understand more of this behaviors, and human behavior, we can make an impact to the creatures that we share the earth with, and we can make these decisions to kind of reduce our negative impacts and help protect it. And this is again not for Churchill, but the moon and the stars, they don't belong to one culture, right? They belong to anyone who has ever wondered. And when we can protect these dark skies, we'll kind of protect the oldest human stories that we have. So tonight, if you step outside, look for the bear. And thank you so much for sharing the night sky with me. And thank you so much for your time, Rob, as well, and everyone here. Sorry I babbled too much and perhaps went a little over.
Katrina, thank you so much for such a thorough and fun webinar today. We really do appreciate you taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel to Churchill with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available from our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. So long, everybody. We'll see you next time.